Hello, everyone. I'm going to be mainly talking about things related to understanding our mind with effects. So the takeaways or results will involve having a kind of a understanding that'll allow us more control over our mind in a very practical way. And then that'll relate to personality traits that aren't, there's plenty of individual personality traits, right? I have individual preferences and personality that's not the same as other people's normally, right? And still, and just like everyone, we're all different, so to speak. But then there's certain traits that kind of universally are great. And we can, using our method where we can know things and the difference between knowing something in a clear way versus just believing it or it being gray, right? There's a vast difference if we know something for certain, and which means understanding it in a clear way, understanding the distinction between it and its opposite in a clear way where there's no question that one is right and one is wrong, or that one is absurd and the other has to be right, that kind of thing. And in practice and in practical results and in reality, as I've discovered various things like that, right? It's kind of not so much not so much variable personality trait that we all have and I still have versus other people. But there's certain aspects or ways of operating personality wise that a kind of simple example would be what I refer to like justice, right? Then it ends up being a personality trait when you understand that justice is not really, and I mentioned with fairness, right? Justice and fairness are not real. They're just basically not relevant concepts. They're not foundational in any way. You can construct a scenario where it's preferential to have justice rather than not, or fairness rather than not. But you'd have to construct a scenario around it to force it to be the case. So it wouldn't be a premise. It would just be like a conclusion built into a scenario. And so that would, I have other things in mind. That gives an example of, but there's so many ways that people operate interpersonally and in their own head where if they don't understand about fairness or justice, they practically go left on a fork instead of right on a fork in the road. Like they have different responses, you basically think and act differently in various ways. It threads its way through your personality and cause you to make all kinds of better decisions and responses and basically cause you to be more likable. I've talked in the past, to kind of give you an overview here, I'm just still giving you a bit of an overview. I referred many times to the paradigm or idea of not wanting to be superior to other people, right? Which is typically a very strong motivator for people, is to feel superior, that either as an individual or often it manifests tribally or within groups and out groups. It's extremely consistent and powerful and strong and incorrect to want to feel like your in group is superior to some out group, right? That if you're Russian, you're superior to those Americans, right? Or vice versa. That trait of wanting to feel superior is a huge feature of how people operate. We feel it and work it into our interpersonal reactions all the time in a helpful way. In essence, we cater to it. And do I? You have to, right? You certainly don't want to do something that makes somebody feel like that messes up their sense of superiority, right? Or that they're already right or already awesome. But the more and more I think a lot of you have either made progress or fully get this, but the more that's not part of your thinking. But you can only remove things like this from your thinking at a deep level. You can't just declare, I'm not going to try to feel superior anymore. You need to, with all of this stuff, it's not about, oh, these beliefs are useful, right? Tony Robbins does something that's not wrong at all. It's useful and interesting, but he'll point out, here's useful, practical beliefs to have. I'm doing something radically different, but it'll look the same on the surface. What's radically different is to ideally, right? I don't necessarily accomplish it. Like I can't prove something to you like unilaterally. I can help you understand it for yourself, so to speak, but to see the distinctions and kind of walk through how to know something when you can know how to know and apply it to a particular idea, which you then act on, which is my definition of belief is what you act on, then that's very different than just adopting a belief because it's useful, right? Without proving and breaking and switching your foundational frames, right? That's what I'm talking about. And not just by switching because this one looks better. The only way a frame can feel or look better, I've taught you this by now, right? Is if you're looking at it through a perspective, right? So if you like look at a potential belief and feel like, oh, that's better. I like that one better. Let's adopt that. Then it's not foundational, because something foundational you can only change through perspective less, which I've talked about. I'll continue to talk about. I've given the fundamentals where it involves seeing distinctions and matching and mismatching rather than associating. It's weirdly counterintuitive. It's very simple, which is why it might seem like I haven't explained it sometimes, but it's very counterintuitive. You're always going to feel like doing something different than that, at least by default, until you really build to a different place, which you might have already done. But until someone builds to a very different place, it feels or counterintuitive, or it doesn't even exist, to think without a perspective, to match rather than just associate. I'm constantly giving you examples every time. Every word out of my mouth is essentially demonstrating the overall method that I'm talking about. Okay, let's see here. I can look through the questions in a bit. So I'm giving an overview of today, mainly talking then about mind, but overall in this home stretch part of the series, which is the kind of the last part of the series, but it'll go on as long as necessary until kind of between you and myself, we're both reasonably satisfied that I've covered what I need to cover to paint the overall picture of how the world works from an outside in perspective rather than the usual how the world works from an inside out perspective. Of course, inside out, not said either day, but I'll just say it that way for now. But when I say outside in, I'm talking about building things properly. And it's a very different sense of how the world works, a different meaning of the question, right? We're asking how the world works from the basis of we're a being. We don't change. If we change, we wouldn't exist anymore by logic. We're conscious of what we're conscious of. We have a variable. I covered this last week, right? And in the past, we have a variable experience. So we want to have a good experience rather than a bad or a mixed experience. We have where we interact with, very integral to our existence is our mind, right? So what's the relationship between us as a being and our mind? And then what's the relationship between us as a being, our mind, and then the outside world or whatever world is out there besides our mind? And then there's other people which are in the same situation where they're a being, they have a mind, they're interacting with an outside world that we share, right? I'm not going to get into this. I don't think about it, but of course there could be people in some other totally separate world that we don't share, but we all share. In some way, shape, or form, we obviously share a world, but we don't share a mind, right? We have our individual minds and our experiences are different and we're individual beings. And from that perspective of looking at it that way, so what's our relationship with our minds? How do our minds work? Both how do we interact with our mind as a being? And how does our mind interact with the world? How do all three of us interact? That's where's the seat of our power that I talked last time. We have to have some amount of power, free will, ability to make decisions, or else everything's meaningless. And it's not. And every action we take is based on the premise that things are not meaningless. Anything that you can't act on for even a second is wrong. It's absurd. It's not the case. So there's meaning, there's decisions to be made. There's some seat of your power and free will. There's something that we can do as a being that can maximize the goodness in our experience. The world is made up. It's essentially of everyone's consciousness field. Plus, then there's the reasons for the consciousness, as I referred to in the past. How does that all work? That's what I mean by how does the world work? I'm not talking about what are the universal forces and factors. That's interesting. That'll matter, but it's not our first question. And if we try to build our understanding of the world off of starting with there's a physical universe and that's what started everything, and that's the basis for everything, we get tangled up and we're just wrong about everything. It's the incorrect starting point. And we start sounding stupid once you really know how to think just decently. And you know what you're talking about. When you listen to people that are materialists in practice, they're generally evolutionists and so forth. When they talk, they're like, oh, there's no purpose in the universe. And then there's no God. But then they talk about the universe as if it has purpose and it is the same as God. They're like, the universe created this. Evolution did this. It designed this. It designed that. They can't talk without using the words design, create, did this. Evolution was clever with this, right? This happened for this reason. This happened for this reason. This wing exists for that reason. And their talk is full of design, reason, and creation. Progress, even though progress is supposed to mean nothing but produce the most grandkids, they constantly equivocate, which means change the meaning of progress to something else besides just having more rank. Progress would be if you started giving birth to bacteria. That would be great evolutionary progress. You'd have way more grandkids. right? Progress is not going from a mammal or a primate, like a monkey to monkeys are primates, right? To a human, right? Progress is whatever has more grandkids, roaches, bacteria, things like that, right? It's a great regress to become an oak tree or a whale or a human or whatever, according to natural selection theory, right? It just contradicts itself every way, shape, or form. So all over the place in every way, people contradict themselves and get tangled up and confused. They get totally confused about consciousness. Where does it come from, right? The world is based on the fundamental basis for reality is a bunch of molecules bouncing around. Then where does free will come from? Where does consciousness come from? And they just get confused. They just sound like idiots when they start talking about that stuff. And they basically just don't. And things like that. So what we want to do is have the basis start, I talked about it last time, and then ask what's going on. And then we ask good questions, right? About what's really happening, where we're targeting things that really matter and matter in an extremely practical way, right? We're trying to have a better experience for ourselves and other people. And the answers to that is going to lie in the relation between us as beings and our minds. And then the things like goals are obviously pretty central to that, right? We can poke around like that, right? What I mean is we can leap around looking for a thread to pull on, because any thread you pull on is going to lead you to useful stuff when you're looking for it the right way. So the nature of how goals work in our mind, right? Things like that, and how that relates to happiness, how it relates to frustration or unhappiness or anger or fear, and stuff like that, right? Getting a sense of how the physical world works is totally helpful and relevant. And luckily we have lots of people running around doing that, reporting stuff, building cell phones and cars and whatever else, right? Launching machine, computers, right? Al Gore invented the internet and things like that. So that's terrific. We're very glad people do that. And very glad if any of you go add to that. Glad if I add. But it's inside a box. It's relevant, very relevant. But it's not the foundation. That's not what I'm covering for the most part when I'm talking about how things work. And what I'll cover will add to things and frame things in a great way so that the other answers about how things work that are more inside various boxes will all fit in place very nice. All right. So let me go to a slide here and start with a takeaway. All right. So here's going to be, as it comes together, it's reasonably self-explanatory, and then it'll come together presumably more and more, is going to be quite a good takeaway. So the main way to control our mind is via our goals. You could say its goals. However, when we start talking about you and your mind and differentiating them, but also just trying to talk, then sometimes I'm going to like the conflict between common speech and what's exactly technically accurate regarding who we are in our mind and referring with various pronouns we're just gonna mostly, if we just don't worry about it much and don't play the word police. I have a fairly clear idea what I'm talking about. So don't worry if I seem like I'm talking and I seem to use the wrong pronoun or whatever. Don't get confused. You know, just find the right meaning of it and assume that's what I meant. I don't mean I understand everything, but this is the kind of thing I think about a lot and I have a lot of clarity on. All right. So regardless of the exact meaning of goals for the moment, in a practical way, there's something that'll help you right now. And then it'll provide something where the more you look at it, the more you understand around it, right? To understand something means understand literally has the word under. So it's like underneath, but it could also mean overall stand something, outside stand, context stand something, whatever you compile more of an understanding of the framework and things related to it, right? And then you understand it more and more by understanding things related to it. So the more you understand goals and things related to goals and your mind and such, then this will make more sense. You'll figure out all kinds of useful things that are very practical. But what I wrote here on this slide is the main way to control our mind, is via its goals, both via kind of thinking about our overall goals, but also in the moment. If you're getting frustrated with something, that's a result of goals getting either tangled up or miscoded, however you want to represent it. But if you guys have already experienced this in plenty of ways and you report back to me, right? But this is just putting it in a particular way here. When I've talked about frustration or anger, right? I've gone through, or fear, right? When things get set up in a certain way in your mind and you're immersed in a particular goal and you feel like plan A is what you want and there's no plan B, right? What you can do and get more and more in the habit of doing. And again, with anytime I say something like that, you may already be in the habit based on other things we talked and based on your own work. But anyhow, I'm never assuming that you're whatever, not haven't figured something out yet. But when you set a goal, you can get more and more in the habit of saying, okay, here's what I want. And when you act on that, then you're either going to get the result right away or you're not. And you can actually in advance picture things or plan things in your mind so that if you get in the gate, you break down the walls the first time, and then that's plan A. And then plan B is if you don't, then here's what you'll do. And plan B, the simple default plan B is you'll gain understanding both immediately and through some little bit of reflection on not getting the immediate result that's ideal. And then you'll assess from there and you'll be in a better position to assess the next plan A, right? Plan A 2.0 or whatever. And that once you get the feedback, once you don't get the ideal result, that would mean you were done. And so that's your default. And then when I report about myself, I'm just going to give you an indication of what might be reasonably doable, right? Some things are theoretical and some things I experience. And so with this, it's pretty ingrained, I would say, in my mind at this point, where it's genuinely a habit for the most part. I can make a mistake here and there, but then there's a red flag and I know what I did wrong and I fix it. But pretty consistently, I have both plan A and the kind of default plan B, where I know that I'm going to go and see if I get the result that I ideally want, right? Straight for it or straight. It might be zigzagging, but it's essentially going for it the way that it seems best given my current understanding of the situation. So I'm going to go straight for it, which could mean doing a number of tasks that aren't exactly straight, right, from an airplane, but I do my best attempt at going right after what I want. Sometimes you particularly realize that you don't feel like it's likely that you'll get a result from even your best guess at something, but then you still do your best guess and when that happens, people tend to get less frustrated just normally because they felt like they probably weren't going to get it anyway. But what you can do is not even really have thought quite like that. I only calculate how likely it is that I'll hit a target if I have to take action right now. If I'm doing OMG Live, then I have to guess how many people are going to sign up initially to do the room block, right? Reservation. So in that case, I have to make some guess, right? If I don't have to act on any kind of particular expectation of whether I'm going to hit my ideal target, I don't really think about it. I don't worry about whether I'll hit it, like in terms of what's my odds. Right? People calculate their expectations and odds just in order to make sure that they can still feel awesome about themselves afterwards, right? And when you're not trying to do that, then that eliminates a lot of when you have to try to predict whether you're going to get a result the first time, whether a client's going to say yes, whether you're going to rank a website in 3 months or not, whether it'll take longer. It might be once you eliminate proving that you're already awesome, that you're already a master at it, you're already an expert, you're already great, you're already right, then the motivation for trying to predict things in advance gets a lot lower, which clears up your vision so that when it is relevant, you can see it. And when it's not, you just don't bother, right? Thinking about what are the odds I'm going to succeed on this thing. You just know, all right, it's time to take some action. I've done a reasonable amount of looking at it and planning. I'm going to go for it and I'll learn something from that. I'll either hit it or I'll be in a better position to assess my next attempt. And it might be that you try 3 times the same exact thing because it might be the nature of the situation might be like you have a script that you think is pretty good and an overall presentation. Just because one potential client says no doesn't mean you scrap the whole thing. You might, in that situation, reasonably conclude that you can give it like 3 tries and then assess after that, 3 different people and give that presentation. All right. Anyhow, back to this main slide. The main way to control our minds is via its goals, both overall and in the moment. And what that means is instead of just trying to say, damn it, I don't want to be angry, or just getting angry and responding however, or if we have a task coming up and we feel like we don't really want to do it or we're not motivated enough, then one of the things that's going on is when I say goals, I don't just mean trying to set or focus on certain goals. I also mean that your mind can be cluttered up with other goals and you want to get better and better at dropping a bunch of having goals active and influencing you that are not serving you at that time or in that place or within those boundaries. It's extremely useful. It's very useful looking at a sales letter or writing a written communication to be able to drop your goals. And we'll get to standards in a moment, which are one tier above goals, controlling and guiding the goals. But if you are projecting your own goals and standards onto things when you're writing or speaking or communicating at all, then it's going to get in the way, right? Even if you have a sense of someone else's goals and standards and what they're looking for, to the extent that your own goals are active, think about it, right? If you think in terms of magnets or any kind of force or gravitation, if you have your own gravitational things active, then it's going to mess with the pure gravity that you would want, right? Like you won't be able to feel, and think of it in terms of feeling. Um, let's say you have a piece of iron in your hand and someone's holding a pretty powerful magnet a few feet away. Then you can, because you're holding the iron, you can feel the magnet that's a few feet away, right? You're holding the iron, it's being magnetized, you feel it. Now, let's say that we set up a bunch of other magnets nearby. It would mess with your ability to feel that one magnet that your friend is holding a few feet away. There'd be other things pulling and it would interfere with your feel. You see that? So that's actually a terrific mental picture that reoccurs constantly throughout each day. Is you want to feel both your own specific goals, right? Think about it. If you have a task that you need to do, then you'll actually feel like you want to do it. I've said this in different ways in the past, but in light of this metaphor, this illustration, I want to say it in this new way. You'll obviously feel the pull where you literally want to do it by logic. The only reason you would feel like you don't is other magnets are active pulling and messing with your feel. You have to feel like you want to do something that you need to do. Need means you really want to do it. Now you might say, "Hey, David, there's things I need to do I don't want to do." But think about it logically. That can only be the case if other things are pulling on you. If you're only aware of a particular need and that's it, and you have nothing else pulling on you, then it's pulling on you. You feel it. You feel that you want to do that thing. You might not feel like you want to do it the same way you feel like you want to eat ice cream, but you feel like you want to do it in the sense of when something comes up that feels like urgent and it takes over your focus, you feel like you want to do it in a very real way, right? So again, logically, it must be that other things are pulling. And so then the next logical conclusion after that is, wow, it's an incredible understanding and skill based on the understanding to become aware of and drop these magnets, right? That are, so to speak, right? These other goals that are literally messing with my feel. We want our feelings aligned with what we first figure out is best for us, right? Like the ideal in life, in one way of looking at it, is that we would want a simple way of thinking that allows us to think what's ideal, what's the best bang for my buck, what's my priority in this situation, right? What actions do I ideally want to take? What goal do I want to go after? It's all different ways of saying the same thing. Yes. So we'd want some kind of simple method that's accurate of figuring that out. We there is not such a method, practically speaking, because there's so many details in life, but there is such a method of figuring out part of it, right? Like if any particular situation, task, or like overall situation you might have in a coming up and dealing with in your life, there's a set of frames, right? There's a whole set of things going on. Some of the frames can be figured out definitely. Some of the details can't be because they involve the outside world that you can't nail down perfectly. But a number of the things about it you can figure out, right? Such as if you are doing it for justice, and you could realize that you don't want justice. Right? Ideally, like you might feel like you want it, but it dissolves if you look at it properly. All right. So we want to figure out things that we want as frames. That's not the same thing as being omniscient, right? But if we get the basic frames right, then great. The more frames that we could know, that we do know, the better. And in essence, you figure out, all right, based on what I'm going to stipulate about the outside world, right? At that point, you can know, right? There's certain things that you think are the case about the outside world. My client wants this website ranked for these keywords, right? Whether or not those are the best keywords for whether your client, whether or not your memory is wrong, you wrote down, you can't know, but you can stipulate that's correct. Once you stipulate it, it's true for the sake of thinking about it, right? You might as well pin it down and be clear about what you're going to act on rather than often people are unclear about even things like that in a sense. I don't mean about per keyword, things they could be clear on that they're not. With stipulation, you don't need to know it for sure. You can stipulate it and it's still very relevant because then you stick with it. Like it's fixed and clear in your mind. All right. Anyhow, you want to be able to figure out what your plan is. And then you want to feel it, right? You, just like my illustration of driving a car, we don't want to eternally just be fixing our car and building a car. We want to drive it. We can't, we only have, probably, as far as I can tell, and it's a useful kind of premise, at least for now, is we only have so much effort or energy to go against our feeling, right? It's like a current that's going in a certain direction. So one way or the other, we obviously want to feel, want our feelings to match up with our plans, right? Like our plans we come up with when we are thinking most clearly. And one huge hint in dealing with that is that most of what is going to create a mismatch between our, what we feel like doing or what we feel like is, it's not just what we feel like doing in terms of motivation. It's, we can feel like something that's correct to do is wrong to do. We can have a feeling like it's wrong, right? And we don't want that either. It's going to mess with us. So a lot of that is dropping goals, and goals can also be totally dropped automatically when we change more outer frames, standards and things like that, which I'll get to. So to bring it down to a useful phrase takeaway, and then I'll continue with the slide. But if your feelings aren't lining up, then when you feel like you wish you had more control over your mind, right? When your feelings, either your motivational feelings or you're feeling like you're doing the right thing, are not lining up with other thoughts that you have or plans, or especially what you have gone through in your mind is what you would ideally like, and your feelings lining up with it, or you're experiencing any kind of negative feelings, then you have this sense often that you'd rather have more control over your mind. Or if you notice that you respond in a way that was not helpful, then you think, oh man, I want to have better control over my mind in the future, that sort of thing. Or if your mind is giving you thoughts or anxiety or whatever, right? On all these cases, we might say, I want to control my mind. In each of those cases, if you, we might need a couple of steps that I'll get to accomplish this, but the kind of immediate thing between succeeding with controlling your mind as best as reasonably possible, the thing that comes right before that is that you are adjusting your goals. And so there's an understanding that'll help you do that, but it's nice to know what comes, like reverse engineering, right? Where it's nice to know what comes right before the effect of controlling our mind in the way we want. And that is that our goals get adjusted. And our goals are going to get adjusted. It's actually easy to adjust your goals if you're step back to the right standards or the right outer box for the moment. Those are not necessarily exactly synonyms, but it's okay for that. So you step back to an outer perspective where when you look at it, once you're standing in the right place, then the goal that is useful looks right, and the other goals look like you just want to be dropped. They don't make any sense right in that moment. So that's going to be what happens right before the goal. So right before you control your mind, your goals are going to get adjusted. Right before your goals get adjusted, you're going to be standing on a perspective where the right goal looks good and the other ones don't look so good. Right. So let's say you're about to respond to your child in a way that you're going to regret. Then the way to avoid that would be to stop and say, wait a second, what are my goals here? All right, I have a few of them. One is I want to be loving towards my child. Another one is that I want to get him in the damn car. And then right before you respond, you would adjust which goals are active and which are dropped, right? And when just the right goals are active, if your only goal was to lovingly support and raise your child overall, ultimately, so that he or she was well adjusted and lived had the best reasonable chance at living a nice life and so forth as they were older, then it's relatively easy to not snap at the child right now. Of course, by contrast, if the only goal that you really were immersed in was getting them in the damn car right this minute, then it's much easier. And the goal to not have them be arguing with you or poking you, or I don't want them to define me. I want them to respect my authority. I want them to be behaved. All these goals, then you snap and yell and do all sorts of whatever. I'm just saying that by way of illustration. I think we can all at least picture that. I'm not talking about parenting. I'm just illustrating goals. All right. So then the next question would be, all right, David, for that to work in the moment, I need to have outer frames or standards to fall back on that are useful and accurate. and correct that will allow me to see and feel the way that that's going to be quickly. Right? When you're standing in the right perspective, then you quickly and easily see and feel the right way. Just if you can't see where to go, if you're in the woods and you can't see where to go to get to the town, if you are in a helicopter, a different perspective, right? If you're standing or sitting on the helicopter in a different place, then you might just look down and it's dead obvious where to go to get to the town, right? And so same thing in your day-to-day situations, or even with big overall plans in your life, same thing. When you're in the right perspective and you're standing there, then you just look and it's obvious. You see it, you feel it. There's no real temptation to go anywhere else, right? It's just the woods. And now that we have another illustration, right? The woods and the helicopter. If you're in the middle of the woods, you can't see which way to go. And you might feel like going one way or the other way. It might feel right. But once you're looking from the helicopter, those feelings are irrelevant and it's dead obvious where to go. And it's the only thing that you see or feel is just obviously you go to the town, you see, right? And that's how it is day to day in life when you look at things this way. But that does mean that you need to have the outer frame or standard to fall back on in the first place. And guess what? That's the overall topic that we're dealing with, and that's why it matters. And a frame isn't often just one thing. There's various assumptions and premises and aspects of what I'll call a reality that I'll cover as well. Again, that is that build, right? Like to go to our helicopter and forest illustration, a helicopter is not just one thing. In a sense, it's built, right? Or it's a bit of a complex object and you build it, right? Similarly, building an overall outer frame that allows you to make a lot of money or perform a particular task, right? There's various pieces and aspects to it that you build. And the more those pieces get built, then the more, useful it is and such. And everything I'm talking about now is part of building all those pieces. Everything I've been saying on this webinar is part of those pieces. So I wrote on this slide, we do this by stepping back, and I basically said this, but I'll just read it. We do this by stepping back to standards whenever we notice we want to adjust our mind. When I say adjust our mind, basically adjust our immediate goals, right? Which goals are active and influencing us and making us feel right now. When I say active, there's certain goals that adjust how you feel, just like with the iron in your hand, right? And your friend has a magnet a few feet away. But then if there's other magnets that other people are holding nearby as well, right? That's like the different goals. They're active and relevant to the extent that they're pulling on that iron in your hand. You want to be able to step back to where essentially you can look at the situation and get the people with the magnets that you don't want to just move away, right? In other words, you want goals that are not going to be, you don't want active right now. You don't want them adjusting how you feel right now, right? There might be other times when you do want different goals to be active. There might be a time when it's very appropriate to go to the gym and go take a swim, right? And then you want that magnet to be active and you want to feel that and enjoy that. And then there's a different time when you don't want to be feeling like, oh, I want to go for a swim right now because there's something else that you're doing, right? That's why I watch with the smartphone, right? It kind of can make various goals or things like pop up the trigger, right? Goals can be activated by triggers. And if we have little things outside of our intentionality triggering them, then that messes with our ability to determine what goals are active. And I pay close attention. When I talk about immersion, right, then immersion is a significant tool in making a goal feel active, having other goals not be active. If you're immersed in one magnet, one goal, one overall thing, then that naturally reduces the pull and influence or basically eliminates them down to nil of other magnets, which is useful as long as that's what you want, right? But I manage that and it's very important. Sorry, it's an important tool in your arsenal, right? In one manner of speaking, in a practical way, life is about, I've talked about this with the way I talked about the goalscape, right, in alchemy, but life is about managing what goals are active in your mind. In a sense, isn't life about love? Sure. I'm not contradicting things like that. I'm just saying it in kind of one way of talking, a practical way, right? That statement that life is in one sense about managing goals is useful until it's obviously wrong. But I just mean it in terms as far as it's obviously correct and not where it's not. So goals flow from a perspective or outer frames or standards. There's actually, I can give you this kind of triplet here that's going to help illustrate this even further. There's a way that this is pretty true and there's a bit of a hierarchy to it too, right? your actions day by day, right? If I go to a particular Starbucks to go get coffee each day and I get a particular coffee, that flows from a habit, right? The action doesn't come out of nowhere. It's made more likely by a habit that I have. It's not that I can't act outside of a habit, but what happens by default, I'm going to go with the habit. This is why the word default, right? And this other triplet, thinking in terms of default and how that affects things. When people talk about habits, the habits of how they affect the people and so forth, they'll say things like habits determine our behavior or our success. Default doesn't determine anything. It acts as default. Currents or vectors don't determine where you go, but they act, they have a force. In the absence of any other forces, they will determine where you go. And in the existence of other forces, they could make it less efficient or more efficient, depending on whether in the direction you want to go, right? Again, default is its own thing. It's a fundamental concept. That's why it's critical, right? These ideas like default, thresholds, and arbitrary, if you don't have them at the tip of your tongue, you can't really understand the world and how it works. And again, you say things like habits determine our success. They don't any more than currents determine where a boat goes, but they do determine where a boat goes if you're not overcoming it. And they determine that it's going to use a lot more energy to get where it's going if you're going against it. And it might be a brilliant strategy to find the right current and go sideways a little bit and get on the right current, right? And then could be way more efficient overall than just trying to fight up a current against the current. Right. There may be times when just fighting against your feelings is necessary and useful in the moment, right? There's times when something's urgent, we're in a rush, and you just try to get something done, even if you just don't feel it. But overall, getting over and what we're doing now, right? If this doesn't feel efficient to somebody, then they're always in a rush. It's always urgent. The next immediate urgent, so neurologically close, right? Psychologically close stuff feels important to them. What we're doing now is spending a little bit of effort, right? Thinking more deeply about outer frames. And we get them right, then all these kind of underlying currents are in our favor, right? So again, default does what it does not determine, but it's very relevant and very important, the default. So habits form the kind of default on our actions. And default is going to have, in practice, a major impact on what our actions are going to be, right? Our habits are going to major. There's a feedback loop here, right? If you change your actions and go against the current, it'll start to influence your habits over time as you hit. That's obvious. Now, I would say there's a hierarchy here, and also being aware of both sides of this, like habits and actions. It's relevant because the habit acts as like a magnet, right? Or a current or whatever, but an active force on our actions. If we just try to change our actions without realizing that our habits provide also like a framework, and we make the mistake. What's the basic mistake people make regarding framework? Is their mind extrapolate how difficult something will be, how likely something will be, what the trend is, without taking into account the building or changing of a framework, right? If someone listens to a webinar and it's complicated, they say it is complicated. They don't say typically that a framework will build and then it'll make more sense. They just think that the framework that they have will remain constant. Of course, they also believe they can learn. People have contradictory beliefs, but the kind of incorrect feeling of extrapolation based on your framework not growing and changing is constantly messing up people's decisions, plans, predictions of even identifying a webinar or labeling it, categorizing. They're categorized, right? They'll categorize things. Or they'll say that a person is difficult or arrogant when that's how the person is towards someone that they don't respect yet or trust yet, or that is perceived to be in an out group rather than an in group. And so it's much more useful to say the person is acting in practice arrogant, but that can change if I change the category that person puts me in their mind, right? So if the framework changes. So again, by default, people's minds don't take enough into account that frameworks change and can grow, change, and so forth, potentially. And anyway, by looking at what I have on this slide here with the habits and actions, and I have norms and beliefs and standards and goals, it's further solidifies for you, further builds a framework for you of a way of seeing the world where you have these underlying framework. Default is like an example or a manifestation of a framework, right? And it can change. And realizing that we can change the default of things is critical. And again, it's constantly counterintuitive in a sense. Like people, what the way things are normally for people, they both believe that frameworks can change and think and act as if they can't at the same time, right? People believe that they can learn and change while simultaneously believing and affirming things that entail that they really won't, right? The minute someone says this webinar is complicated, or they say this thing is easy, whenever you say something's easy or hard, you're implying that a framework that it's true all the time, right? Outside, which implies that a framework doesn't change, right? Whether something's easy or hard is relative to a framework. So labeling something as easy as hard or hard, kind of in and of itself, denies the idea of frameworks building and changing or going away, right? So people are constantly denying, like talking and thinking as if framework can't build and change, while at the same time, they of course sometimes act and think on the idea that frameworks can build it. So they have both. And instead what we want to do is only have one, which is that framework can build, change, go away, vary amongst people, and so forth. And that's very practically empowering, as I think a lot of you have experienced that and are experiencing it, where once you really feel like, oh yeah, I can do that if I'm willing to put the resources, time, focus, energy, whatever, into having a framework build for that particular type of task or skill. I will then like it more, have an easier time doing it. It'll be easier rather than hard. And so, okay. So habits form a default and they're a framework that affects how easy actions are. At first, if you try to change your actions, you're going against a habit default framework. But at the same time, by sticking with changing an action, then you're changing the framework itself, just like same thing as if you learn something, right? You're building a framework, things get easier and easier. Having a overall deep frame, that is how it works, and feeling it is very empowering. All right. Now, your habits themselves come out of what you believe, how you believe things should be, right? Generally. But someone's beliefs, right? People's beliefs, which is what they act on, and of course what they affirm, right, is true. People actually have a goal to believe things, right? They don't believe things because of evidence or anything like that. They believe it because they want to believe it, right? The rest is just a justification of whatever. Reality, evidence, logic, and so forth in practice form almost 0% of the reason people believe. The reason people believe things is because they want to believe them because of what they think, their mind subconsciously essentially determines is normal, right? For their peer group of whatever, their in group of whatever that might be. You're conscious often or aware of what you think is normal, but the process of determining what's normal is what's subconscious typically, and you tend to not be aware of, but then you just feel like it is normal and it is right. And then you want your beliefs, your mind wants its beliefs to be aligned, has a goal to believe things in line with its norms. And the cool thing is, as we unravel this whole chain here, we get to this other huge concept I talked about on this slide, the default thresholds and arbitrary, right? As I've said also before, I've referred to the practical key to controlling your mind involves goal. The ultimate key to controlling your mind involves this concept of arbitrary. You can always win out over your mind, so to speak, when you keep calling its bluff until it gets to the point where it's, yeah, okay, sure, I fabricated, and it's arbitrary at its root. Okay, so let's keep tracing this. So people believe what they want to believe, right? And based on what they feel like is normal for their in-group and their peer group. Let me think how goals, I had this before, how it all relates, right? I may not be able to tie it together perfectly, but I'll start talking and see what happens. This norms and beliefs line is a little bit parallel, but I feel like there's a little bit of a hierarchy as well, where our norms, I meant to say, are determined by what our brain assesses as our peer group. And there's a way which means that the method by which your brain decides what your peer group or your in group is, and it has a number of these, right? It's not just one, but which means that is how you think without a perspective or unravel things, is you look at what has to underlie what's going on. So if norms are determined by what your brain thinks is the average among your peer group or various in groups, then the method by which your mind determines who your peers and in-groups are is going to determine your norms. And I'm going to have some more even insight on this as that in between webinars, like in the next week, or how this all ties together. I'll just talk separately for a second. Then let me try to just directly describe what I mean by our goals flow from our standards. What you think is norms and standards blend together in a sense in my mind, but they're distinct at times and blend together at times. You might on your own be able to get extra clarity, and then I might myself get some clarity, especially for saying it out loud. There's some things I feel at the moment that I'm not, they're not coming out of and articulated very well. But goals don't just come out of nowhere. They're not like foundational for your mind. What you have is a sense of what is normal, like I have with norms, how things should be, right? Your standards are a sense of things should be this way. You should respect your parents or not, or you should be a patriot or not, or you should follow the law, or you should quote Shakespeare well, and so on. You can't, it's stupid, right? And then if you feel like an educated person should be able to quote literature decently, then you'll have a goal to manifest that, to do that. If you think that your children should show you respect, by which you really mean they should defer to you and not fight against you or argue with you, then that's a state. You feel like things should be that way. Again, that's why norms and standards kind of blend together, because our mind has a way of looking around and seeing how people act around us that seems similar to us, right? And adopting those standards from there and norms. And then we have a belief about how things should be. We have our goals to conform to that, right? To keep up with the standards that are in our mind. Trying to change goals without changing your overall sense of what should and shouldn't be. Trying to change your beliefs without changing, again, what you think should be true, right? Is fruitless. You need to, and you're going to keep fighting against something more powerful. You're gonna be like, I don't feel it. You shouldn't, like Schumann asked, but isn't it unfair that some people have so much money and some people have, it's not even that it's true or not, that it's unfair. The issue is what is more like what we should do about it. Should we react with violence because someone happens to have traded for a lot more than somebody else? No. Now, already within my property rights paradigm, not mine, but the property right, the idea that individuals can own property rather than they can't, is the idea, like, of course, if some guy gets $1 billion or even gets $100 by bonking someone over the head and taking it, or by defrauding them or whatever, then that's just a property right violation. But if the person got it by trading, now what if the person took advantage of a situation? We all take advantage of reality, right? Let's say people are stranded on an island and I help organize gold mining on it, right? And I bring picks and tools, and I organize the whole thing, and I organize trade for people to buy the gold and all that. Then am I exploiting there? Well, would be exploiting that. Now, there's a whole separate morality, which has to do with love, right? And caring about people. But whether or not someone shows love has nothing to do with we don't govern love through violence. Right. Like they're two totally different. So we're not going to use violence against someone because they don't show love. Now, if I act to keep those people stranded on the island, then that could be fraud, right? Or if I'm doing it through physical force, then that's other, like assault or battery or whatever it might be, right? If some of them start building a boat and I destroy the boat or I sabotage the boat, that's all property rights violation. But if I'm simply organizing them and providing them with materials and trading vessels to mine the gold, and then whatever I pay them and they accept, that's that, right? If out of love, I might want to do more, caring, whatever you want to call it, right? But anyway, that can start to help see that. When you unravel the thread of fairness and you look at what's actually going on, it constantly ends up with some person is just trying to get money and power by using violence, and they're using the excuse of fairness to do it. What's fair? If we killed everyone, that would be fair. Right? Fairness is not a foundational thing. It leads to the idea we should just basically kill everyone and take everyone and destroy everyone's property. Abundance is what we want. We want as much good stuff, and we want abundance, and we want people to be able to own property, right? We want abundance and the freedom to not have people take what we build and make, and right, and so forth. So we want opportunity that's not that doesn't have someone's iron boot or whatever kind of theft or fraud interfering with it. And then we want as much of that as possible when we're talking about violence, right? And when we should be violent. That's just an example of that I thought of regarding the idea of standards, right? There's one of the reasons why basically have an issue with both major political views in the United States with conservatism and liberalism, but the standards they promote are what are really insidious, right? And I have a bigger problem with liberalism in a practical way. And a lot of the standards they promote are very destructive, right? They lead to goals and beliefs and actions that are destructive. So we need to change the standards. And that because the standards are very entrenched, I use strong visual, kind of strong language. I don't say maybe it's a little bit wrong, right? I say this is insane. This is violent. This is evil, but I'm not exaggerating. But I want to have a clear distinction in standards. I don't want people to be able to hold both sides in their head. I want my mind to be so stark and clear that it isn't going to easily coexist in someone's mind with liberalism. And then that's the bigger problem that I would work on conservatism too, which is also very incorrect and evil and so forth in practice. Not every single one of their ideas, but a lot of them are the basis for a lot. Okay. Good. That explained a lot or at least a good start on things for the moment. Let me go to the discussion and see if you guys have any questions or comments about it. First, I'll start with anything about that, what I just covered, and then I will look at other questions. So if you have any thoughts or clarifications or questions or responses about Jennifer wrote, because this is responding to what I said here, what I talked about. Clearing goals off the table is so huge. I had many irons in the fire, and when David suggested that I simply focus on acquiring, because Jennifer wrote to Mike and then he showed me, and I said, here, tell Jennifer this. And based on that, I didn't know that. It's great. I'm hearing this is some specifics from that. So I'm glad I'm reading this as you guys are. She wrote, I had many irons in the fire, and when David suggested that I simply focus on acquiring a few of a specific client I've had success with and I can make a significant impact for, it immediately lifted such a weight and enabled better focus. I had been afraid to drop the other things because, again, I'm going to interrupt for a second. The thing is, so often it's the dropping of magnets, of goals. And I think that illustration I gave you today with the holding a piece of iron in your hand, and you're trying to feel the right way to go, right, to your friend's magnet would say is the right one, then other magnets only interfere with that. Now, of course, the only exception would be if they all got right next to your friend and put their magnet next to it, then they would further help them. So if that's the case, then fine. But if they're pulling in different directions, then being able to drop goals is great. And again, we drop goals. Goals are governed by standards. And if we look from the perspective of the useful standard, which you might, in many cases, you just already practically speaking have, you just find the standard that you genuinely want to be operating from at that moment. Like with the case of the kid or with the case of that you want to snap at, or in Jennifer's case, she already had a standard that she could look at that made sense to her once she looked at it out. And the other things cleared up when she looked at things from that perspective. It may be the case that we don't have the perspective yet that we need in some cases, but then you can build to it by pulling on threads, as I've shown you. Okay. So she wrote, I immediately lifted such a weight and enabled better focus. I had been afraid to drop the other things because I felt they could be a backup plan, right? And it's what I talk about this webinar. Your backup plan can be as simple, but it's very effective, right? Simple, effective default backup plan is I'll head straight for what I want with focus, using my best attempt with what I know to go straight after what I want or what I think I want, right? And because one way to find out if what you think you want matches up with what is really going to have impact is achieve it and then see, right? Sometimes you can think you think theoretically as well as you originally can, but then you go do it and do something. And your default plan B can be at that point, whether I reach it or not. And you give you don't put 1 foot in and 1 foot out, right? You really go for success. Once it looks like it's reasonable, you go for it. You don't if you have a meeting with a client, what people will try to do when they're in the feeling awesome for themselves already paradigm is say, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, great. No, you go for it. You say, I want this to work out. Ideally, it'll work out, right? Obviously what you want. Mike always remembers this moment where they were interviewing me before the finals of the first pro tour that I made the finals of, which the worldwide tournament was about 300 people that I had to qualify for, like the best players in the world. And I was in the finals and they said, what do you want to happen? And I said, well, I want to win 3-0, right? It was best 3-5. And Mike, that really struck me. That was counterintuitive to him to just say something like that, to think and say it that way. But I figure out what you want. Same thing as if I'm doing a project with someone and I don't know whether there'll be someone that I definitely want to partner with or whether, and they might not want to partner with me or it's a great fit. And how do I find out? I fully set it up for success. I don't put one foot in, one foot out. I don't mean I commit all my resources to it, but as appropriate within its sphere, within its boundaries, I'm all in, right? Within boundaries that are appropriate, all in. That's how you always want to be. If the way that you don't go all in overall is you put boundaries that are within those boundaries. So yeah. And anyway, your backup plan is, so you plan as you set boundaries that are reasonable of what resource you're going to spend and so forth, like an hour talking to the potential client, that sort of thing. And maybe a few hours of preparation, but during that time, that's fully what you're trying to do. And you're not trying to make yourself feel better that by saying, oh, maybe it won't work or it's okay if it doesn't work. Those are pointless thoughts. They're all based on the already feeling awesome paradigm, right? That you don't need. But then automatically, of course, whatever then happens after you go all in within boundaries, you'll be in a better position to assess what to do next after that. And that's it. Okay, great. So you don't need other backups active, right? Just if you're dating, right? It's better to go all in with a particular person within the right appropriate boundaries. Of course, you can talk to various people to decide when you want to figure out the boundaries and when you're going to go all in with a particular person. And in particular, when I say all in, it could just be, I don't mean that you've committed to a long-term relationship with them. I just mean that you're going to spend 2 hours on a date with them. And during that time, you're just in your mind with that or thinking about that person and focus. That could be all in. And then after that, regardless of what happens, you'll be in a better position to assess what's next. Try to have an active plan B. You don't want to be like texting with other people while you're at dinner with the person that, or even I told you when I was doing online chat, I didn't even chat with other people, even though it would be invisible. I would still, my presence, my personality, my responses, they would be less than if I was focused on one person. Great. So Jennifer went on to say, I was afraid to drop other things because I felt like they could be a backup plan or a more effective route to the goal, but instead they were just sucking mental, emotional, and physical resources, right? Just like the dating metaphor that I gave. Even if you're afraid to let go of an opportunity, in quotes, you've been pursuing, take a little time to create scenarios where you pursue one option and drop the others, another option and drop the others. It doesn't require commitment to run those scenarios, and it may be enlightening about what can create the most impact when you're able to focus. Excellently said. Wonderful, Jennifer. Thanks for that wonderful comment, and enabled me to reinforce and further explain such a critical way of operating. All right. And I was really excluded. Yeah, Mike gave another example from another pro tour, a different one where I made the finals. Great. Suleiman, okay, I fabricated it. Haha, now I get it. I want to catch the brain saying that. Yeah, that's great. The arbitrary thing. I'm glad that hit you. It's terrific. I don't mean hit you in particular. I'm glad it hit whoever it hit, including me. But it's hilarious. It's great. The more that tool is hilariously powerful because what's going on with that tool, see, the tool of catching your mind being arbitrary, you see, the root, what you want to do, practically speaking, to control your mind is the thing that comes right before you get what you want in terms of controlling your mind is your goals get adjusted in the way that you want, including some dropped, right? For that flows from your standards. What are your standards? Your standards are what you think your goals should be, right? Now, that idea of should is very important and it has a lot of power. There's times when you want it to have power when it's real, when it's true. But we can have standards that are arbitrary and that should has a lot of power, except it loses all its power. I should be upset about this, or I should have a goal for the person not to do this, but they already did. I should have a goal for the past. Right? Whenever you have a goal for someone who already have done something given in the past, and that's obviously moronic, but we do it all the time. And it flows from our standards. Like, but they should have done this. They should have done that. The minute when you see that the should has no basis, that it loses its power. It loses its power to dictate your goals, which then you find a standard that you do want, use that to power your goals, right? To dictate what goals come, and that's how you control your goals. You dissolve the power of the unhelpful standard or should, right? As soon as you're saying should, that's an indication of a standard. You dissolve that by having your brain, by calling your brain's bluff. And it's like, all right, sure, I have a bit. And it'll give all kinds of justification, but a justification is not a foundation. A foundation would be the opposite can't possibly be correct, right? Let's say there's the idea children should obey their parents. Is it automatic? Is it always automatically incorrect that children, is it absurd for a child to disobey their parents? No, basically no. There's various things where if a parent's being, the problem is sometimes it might be ridiculous for a child to contradict their parents, but from the child's perspective, they don't know which is which. So they have to figure it out. To give another example, if someone's in the army, they could get orders that are perfectly productive, whatever those might be. There could be a cruelly dangerous or bad enemy that's going to rape and pillage and loot all sorts of people. Currently, apparently, we're deathly scared of the looting and pillaging hordes in Canada and Mexico. So we need a standing army, apparently, to fend them off. The minute we didn't have a standing army, then apparently the logic must be that they're going to invade. Of course, you and I probably think it's ridiculous that the Canadians are a bunch of rampaging hordes that are going to invade America. Same thing with the Mexicans. But the fact that we have a standing army means that a lot of people believe and put resources into thinking that must be, or else a bunch of people are going to come here on boats, right? Start doing that. So it could be that if you're in the military, you get orders that are productive. And it could be that you get orders that are not productive. And given that, you need to figure it out, right? Which means that you need to treat all orders as not productive to start with, potentially not productive. And a child actually needs to do the same thing. You think of that. But you can imagine feeling, right? A lot of people feel my child had better not defy me. I don't want that look of defiance in their eye. But I've heard that from plenty. But that's an arbitrary should. Your brain just fabricated that because the opposite of it, if you search around for justifications, your brain will always come up with one, and it can feel real strong. You have to, because what if he was going to run out in the street and there's a car there? Okay. And so that means your child should obey you. All children should always obey all parents. Until what age? But forever? Until they're 18. That's pretty arbitrary. Until every child on the planet until they're 18. Remember, the all is implied, right? And I'm not ranting about kids and parents and obeying them. I'm trying to show you something where you might be able to feel that standard, like it makes sense, and how easy it is to come up with a justification. But justifications are irrelevant. What you need to do is look at the opposite and make sure the opposite must always be absurd. And there's things like that, like the fact that you're omniscient is clearly absurd all the time, right? When would you ever want to act on the idea that you're omniscient? It's just always ridiculous. Same thing with the idea that you know nothing, so you know something. Same thing with property rights, right? You don't own all the property that exists, all the money, all the bodies, all the whatever, all the real property, real estate. That's ridiculous. But to say that you own zero property whatsoever, your body's up for grabs, anything you make or trade for or work you do and earn money, that's all nothing to do with you. That's absurd too. Say you earn some property, right? They developed a comment that was pretty interesting, I think on the last webinar, but after the webinar, about what about property rights if there was like a violation like a generation ago, right? Or something like that. What about fixing something like that? Yeah, there's a gray area with property rights, right? Because we neither own all property, nor do we own no property. Same thing with being omniscient, same thing with being all powerful. Some is what has to be true because all or none is absurd in all those cases. At some point, there's a gray area. What do you do when you start with what you can know? Right now, there's obvious flagrant property rights violations going on. They're institutionalized. We want to get rid of those first, and then we can start to worry about the gray areas after that. You always build from what it's a fun discussion to have, don't get me wrong, but the way to answer the question is you reveal stuff. Remember the framework built. When people say, what are we going to do without taxation? That's another example of where people assume the framework can't build. Maybe we'll find out once we stop, right? Think of how much wildly, as soon as greater good is fine, how many lives could a doctor save over the course of his or her entire career? Thousands, maybe hundreds, right? Even if you don't believe much in modern medicine and so forth, then there's certainly plenty of issues that can come up that they're good, right? Things that involve cutting and but that comes up. Or administering various immunizations or vaccinations, immunizations, or that's sort of curing like certain viral types of curing various infections and whatever else. So even within the margin of error of how great modern medicine is or not, doctors are going to do save some number of lives that's fairly large, more than one, right? So if we want greater good, why doesn't it make sense just to enslave 1% of the population, and every person we enslave could save millions, zillions of lives? Right? There's obviously a flaw there, but that's what we want to look at. We want to look at the absurdity of the opposite. If you can't see how the opposite has to be wrong, then you probably aren't seeing something. Maybe if you can match something exactly, if you can, and you don't have to wonder what do you mean by match it exactly. If it happens, it matches exactly. If you're not sure what it means or whether it's happening, then it does. Oh, I had an interesting illustration also with mathematics that might help. Quick illustration that might help some of you think things through. Another thing about what do we do about the question, like what do we do about gray areas of property rights? Where, for example, some guy's father took someone's land and then the guy he inherited it and then he hires a maid and pays him with some of that money and then whose money is whose, right? But that's still assuming government. Like, what do we do? Now, you might say, no, we're not assuming government. I'm just thinking about ideas. Like, what ideas do we want to have? Right. But there's a way that it's easy to think what rules do we, the minute that means what rules do we have in place? We don't have rules in place. There's not like an overall institutionalized thing that just makes gray into black and white. That's what the law tries to do, right? And sometimes, but that's what brains try to do. But we don't need to, we need to operate in the gray, but not, we want to operate in the gray. And this actually is a transition to what I'll talk about either, probably not now, but in the next webinar and so forth. Because I want to start to, for you to understand how the mind fabricates reality in a useful way. But the more we really deeply understand and feel the difference between stipulating, including like stipulating our reality construct, that be able to think within it as a reality construct, which is very necessary and useful, what we're saying here. We want to be able to operate in the gray without having to pretend that gray is black and white. When we assume, we're pretending that gray is black or white or black and white. When we stipulate, we're not pretending that it's black or white. Just like, for example, if you look at a website and you want to get traffic to it and you do your best guess of keywords to go after, then you can do that in a way where you're aware that you're stipulating. You're saying, all right, I've looked at it a decent amount, and in my best judgment, we're going to go after these 20 keywords. Now, you don't have to, it's counterproductive to then assume that it's true that those are the best 20 keywords. What's good is to realize you're stipulating that, and now you fully act as if it's true, but you understand it's not about whether it's true or not. You stipulated it. And then that gives you a different type of strength and flexibility. You get full strength where it's appropriate and full flexibility where it's appropriate. When you assume, you're mixing strength and flexibility in a way that screws them both up. You have a false rigidity and you ruin your foundation with like flexibility where there shouldn't. So you want to be strong and flexible, but you want those to be separate, right? And with assuming, you mishmash them all together and you lose both. You get strength when you stipulate as opposed to when you don't, because instead of being like, I guess these 20 terms, and then every day you're wondering whether or not, you're going to go after them, or you can do that with a person, right? It's easy to see and happens often with people and relationships where you're like, I guess I'll try to work with this person, or I'll try to do this project, or I'll date them, whatever. And then you're not stipulating properly in the way that instead, with the right boundaries and the right way of looking at it, you say, all right, I've thought about it. And now within these boundaries, I'm going to go for it 100%. So now you have strength and flexibility where you're really strong within those boundaries. And in practice, you can see how that can work really well. And it does. So when you stipulate, you're able to act as if your foundation is totally solid, which is actually, so what if it isn't? No, it's very useful because if it isn't, your boundaries save you. Like if you think through, all right, what if I spend $5,000 on running Facebook ads, $5,000? What will that get me? And then you can think, and then you can't think it through unless if you keep changing the premise while you're trying to think about how it would play out and how your funnel would go and what your projected response, whatever that might be relevant for you to do. If you keep on forgetting that you're spending $5,000, that's your premise, while you're trying to think it through, that's not helpful, right? You want to only think based on the 5,000. And then you can also think through what would happen if you spent 10,000, or then what would happen if you tried to get free advertising through affiliates or referrals or whatever, right? So you think through based on a premise that you understand is stipulated. This is such a critically important thing to do, and it's actually counterintuitive. It's deceptively simple in one sense, but weirdly counterintuitive in another, where people often have a real problem with stipulating how it works. Just like they have a real hard time committing to a relationship within certain boundaries when they should. Even me, and I'd be like a business relationships. Okay. I might have some open thread somewhere there, but that's good for that. I was talking about, yeah, fabricating and so forth. I was talking about how matching and mismatching. Oh, the mathematical model. That's what I was. So regarding things like laws that might exist, you don't need, it's not about laws. Just like if you develop a bunch of mathematical, just basically add numbers up and find out what's correct about various numbers. You're revealing certain equations, the results of various equations. The law, to the extent that there was one, would be the same way. You don't, if you figure out that something's true, like fundamentally about property rights, it's not about, you're not imposing a law. You're not putting black and white into gray. You're just figuring something out that's true. If I figure out true mathematical equations, I'm not imposing anything upon anybody, but I am figuring out things that are true for all people, and that they'd be better off being able to figure out if it came up, right? If it was necessary. And it's actually the same way with like property rights and morality. It's not about just coming up with stuff, but things that you figure out that are correct for all people, but because they're correct, just like with mathematics. Anyway, to the extent that made sense, then good. I'm not going to belabor it too much anymore. Roberto says, I basically understand your magnet example and see it in my life and agree that I want to drop or deactivate some magnet for the sake of feeling a stronger pull toward a magnet that will actually bring me more good. I have that mental picture vividly in my mind, but my next question is, how do I deactivate the pull of the other magnet? I know I can't simply declare it. What's your method? Okay, let's go back to that illustration of we're on the helicopter versus if we're stuck in the middle of a forest and we can only see the trees, right? We can't see where the town is we're trying to get to. The minute you're in a helicopter looking down, then, of course, if you had a GPS unit that was accurate and could just tell you, then let me add something in there. So for a second, imagine you're just in the forest and that's all you have. And you want to get to a town, but you don't have a GPS, you're not in a helicopter yet, right? And you have a feeling like you should go this direction, the particular direction, right? Can you imagine that? This is how I feel it is. And you think maybe that's maybe I have a good direction sense. And subconsciously, my mind has a sense of where the stars are and the sun is. And it's been to the town before, it's telling me where I should go, right? So you feel, right? That's the way we feel, right? When we feel a pull towards something in our mind, which is often like we should go a certain way or that we have an intuition, then we feel like maybe there's a reason for it. And sometimes there is. So there's that feeling. Now, what's interesting though is the minute you have your GPS and you're fairly sure that's accurate, or you're looking at it from a helicopter and you're looking at it that way, you'll actually drop when you find the right place to stand, the right perspective, the right standards, then you actually should effortlessly, you don't have to what you do is you try to find the standard, and then the other tugs or pulls effortlessly drop, right? Take Jennifer Glidden's example. The minute she got either gets or got or would get a few clients similar to her existing client or success, a client or client that she existingly has in that kind of genre or niche, and that was working really well, notice that she would effortlessly and immediately likely stop feeling the tug of other backup plans, so to speak. You can imagine the same thing with dating. You can imagine the same thing with other business related things where you feel tugged in different directions, but then one thing really starts working out. And then you don't really have to necessarily try to drop goals directly. You find a perspective or standard or way of looking at it where the right goal or one goal revealed itself in such a clear way that the others that's actually the way it works. Your explanation for Jennifer was very helpful. Great, great, perfect. Yay, anti-government talk. Believe me, I censor it, believe it or not. No matter how much I talk. it's way toned down and censored compared to my actual thoughts and feelings. Ryan says, if this needs clarification, let me know. But in regards to goals revealing themselves, a lot of discussion on this. This is great and great questions. Could you explain this more? Should I be writing down goals like 55K per month profit from affiliate? Yeah. Okay. So I previously talked to Ryan about goals revealing themselves. And so it's less about writing down your goals. You can really drop in the case of goal stuff. I wouldn't say that's about everything, but in the case of goal stuff, you can probably just forget about everything except for what I say. And I don't have it exactly all figured out, but what I do have figured out is so much clearer and better. Like everyone just crap regarding their goal philosophy because their method is not strong. It's backwards. They just make observations and label stuff and identify and come up with a kind of a mental picture that seems to fit the way things work and so forth. And the bottom line is that writing down something like that can help you focus, and stuff in your environment can help immersion, right? You can put pictures of stuff around and that does help immersion, right? Obviously, whatever is triggering you in your environment and what you're noticing affects your goals. Just if someone walks up to you and says, hey, do you want to do this thing or this activity or whatever? Um, or if someone slips drugs into your water, right? Or whatever you're drinking, that's something in your environment. It can affect your immersion or your goals. So writing things down helps in the sense of an environmental triggers and feedback about what you're immersed in. But the basis for what you write down or what you put in your environment should be that you understand how much money you want to make and why and when. Or it doesn't have to be how much necessarily, but some sort of clarity some sort of perspective that allows you to have a reason, and a reason is that the opposite doesn't make sense. Okay. So let me give an example with money that's either about, again, if I don't, the more I develop this, the better, because in the absence of me developing this, it's going to feel so strong for you guys to confuse justifications for reason. And the word reason has different usages, but in that case, I'm talking about when you're thinking about whether something's correct. I also use the word reason to talk about why you experience what you do in your consciousness field, right? That when I'm talking about reasons now, I'm talking about reasons why an idea is correct or not, and you're analyzing an idea. And so what you want to do is get clarity regarding money of what clearly would be wrong. So what you clearly don't want, for example, perhaps with money, is to have to do things that you really, it's for you to have your priorities dictated by money. Ideally, you have to while you have to, but it's nice in life to get out of that. Because until you earn your way out of it somehow, either through making money or by finding an alternative to money. We don't know what that is, but I presume there's such a thing, but I don't know what it is. I just went ahead and made it up as far as I could tell, the government owns everything. But as long as they haven't taken it yet. So we'll see. You never really, practically speaking, own money until you get audited, right? And then they go through everything and tell you how much you get of their money you get to keep. But anyhow, an example is you might say, I don't want money to have to determine my priorities. And it basically does have to determine my priorities until I have enough of it. That might start to give you clarity. And then you might say, well, what would lead to what would a situation look like where money didn't force me to have other people determine what my priorities are, right? Like unless you have an alternative to it, like you grow your own food somewhere in the middle of the forest or whatever it is, then if you don't have money, you need to earn it by figuring out what other people's priorities are and catering to them. That might just work for you. So this might not be for everyone, but for me, there's a way that living one's life fully within that box doesn't really make sense, right? There's a certain necessary restriction to that. And then you figure out what that would look like. And then the act of doing that will give you a perspective that again will let you drop things that kind of mess with you. And you won't need so many triggers and stuff pulling you forward. Let's go back to my piece of iron in the hand and the magnet that my friend is holding that is like the good magnet. Then if there's other magnets messing with me, then if I don't realize what's happening, I might conclude that what you really need in life is to have your friend or other people have more magnets in the direction you want, right? but you don't necessarily need more magnets in the direction you want. If the magnets that are messing with you and pulling in the wrong direction get dropped, you don't need a stronger and stronger magnets to overcome that. Once you realize that, you don't need to focus so much on motivation, because the motivation, logically speaking, is there. When a goal reveals itself, you obviously have some motivation. There's obviously a magnet towards that thing. You obviously want it to some degree, right? It revealed itself as something that's obviously helpful. So the only thing that, and then, so the only thing where you would need more motivation past that would be if things were messing with you. When you have a perspective that's clear, that allows you to drop these goals that are appearing in an unhelpful way, then you don't need to worry about writing stuff down and posting it everywhere, right? Because you don't need a stronger and stronger motivation. But if there are things messing with you and you have to figure out how to undo those, and if stronger motivation helps you, practically speaking, move forward in spite of that, then sure, go do it. But you see how what I just showed you is a deeper understanding, and that you're not going to generally find other places. And I'm not saying by that by way of trying to sell you anything. Oh, don't listen to them, listen to me, buy my course. There's nothing I'm selling you. It's just that practically speaking, it's just going to take you backwards. I'm trying to help you understand this stuff. What other people are saying is shallow, and it has that fallacy where they don't see what's really going on. And so they see that thing that helps in the wrong, right? Like they think, oh, you just need more and more magnets pulling you in the right direction. They don't realize you can drop the ones messing with you because they don't look at it deeply, clearly in a certain way. So their advice is tainted. They assume problems that don't need to exist and then solve them. And instead you can dissolve the problems. Then you don't need the duct tape or the patchwork solution to a problem that can just be dissolved. Great. It's hilarious, Lord. That's right. Lawrence wrote, I didn't even listen. I had people right. Step one, forget everything you learned from everyone else. Step two, rewatch all of David's Will. Ryan says, then how do we find out what those magnets pulling you other ways? Will be example, like other people's opinions. Yeah, what's pulling you? So, for example, you can notice, like, let's say you're sitting and you want to work, and your mind is, wait, before we do that work, you'll feel even more like working if you go hang out with some friends, or if you go to the bar and check out and see if there's any hot women around, or cool people have this sort of car, or dress this way, or have these people, this many Facebook friends, or people calling them to go out. So I better go out and work on that instead. And it's all presented pretty sneakily, right, by your mind. It just feels like a priority. And then that's tugging on you to do something other than something that's going to make you money, or something that's going to further your understanding of making money. Remember, by default, people really would want to feel awesome about themselves. They don't want to make money primarily. They want to feel like they're already awesome. And that's by far the thing that messes with people the most. Once you're in that wrong basic standard or paradigm or fundamental frame of wanting to already feel like you're awesome and your boxes are awesome and your frames are awesome, right? People that don't listen to my webinars, right? Why do they think they don't need to? Is because they're convinced that their foundational frames, like thinking deeply about their perspectives, is irrelevant because they're already right. They're already brilliant and smart, and they had it all figured out when they were 1 year old, and their method was beautiful. Right. So essentially, to see what the other magnets are, notice what feels like it also matters and what you should also do, or what's limiting or constraining. People have all sorts of sort of constraints and boundaries that are unhelpful, right? You want to have boundaries reveal themselves. And unless they reveal themselves, you don't really want boundaries. You want to be able to go all out, being utterly relentless and ruthless, going after whatever the goal at hand is, whether it's making a partnership work with somebody within boundaries, whatever makes sense. And a boundary that makes sense with a potential partner might be doing a small project with them, right? But whatever the boundary that reveals itself, you want to be all in within that boundary, ideally, and very ruthless. Typically people, they're just all scattered and they have all these rules and things messing with them. And, well, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to do this. Why? You might prove that you're not already awesome. Is that why? Or what is it? So try to get a sense of what you feel like doing. And you might have to pull on threads. I feel like going out to a bar or hanging out with these buddies instead of work. Or I don't feel like doing this because I might feel like I'm silly if I don't, or it might erode my confidence. And then what's the problem with eroding my confidence? What's going to erode my confidence? Having someone say no to me, that's going to erode my confidence. So my confidence is based on people already say yes to me based on what I currently know, what I currently do. Is that good? Is that useful to have to already be right about everything? Or else I don't want to take a step forward. My confidence is based on already being right. Ooh, that's incredibly counterproductive now that I think about it. You see, that's how to pull a thread. I just did a video like over the shoulder. Ryan says, I got you. Realigning what you feel with what's important, understanding feeling and playing video games. Right. You'll feel like playing video games because it's not that you want to escape, it's that you do want something. You want to feel confident. I know this feeling for sure. Right. But I've gone months without playing video games when I've had to. And naturally, right, it drops because I'm focused on what I need to do. And there's whatever the perspective is, I naturally drop the other bolt. I want to get to a point where I don't have to be having my goals dictated by money. Money is like a special case. Outside of money, there's not really a second thing where things are screwing with you, right? Outside of money, you just need to have your own thinking straight and you're pretty set. And remember, when I say money, I'm not telling you that money is all important. I'm telling you that money or a substitute for it is all important because that's how you act and that's how I act. So you either need to get what you're trying to get from money some other way or get some money. And the reality is that's how we all act, and period. So if we're going to act on that, we either stipulate it or we stop acting, but don't deny it while we're acting. And you're not doing that. I'm just saying, like in terms of this, oh, money's not important. Everyone tries to flirt with that at some point. But does money really matter that much? Yeah. Whoever says that, look at their life, right? They go to work. They're desperate to keep their job. They debase themselves in all sorts of ways while trying to convince themselves they're not right at their job and so forth. There's a game coming out soon that I've been looking forward to for a really long time, so I can feel that pull as well. Yeah, there you go. But then if you look at why you're looking forward to it, because I like the previous one. Okay, there's lots of stuff I like, but if I need to do something, why am I thinking about other random stuff that I like? Why is it even on my mind? It's like having my phone on while I'm trying to focus on this, or if I have my phone on during a webinar, which I don't, right? And then if someone calls me, say, oh, I wonder why that. Well, happened because I have my phone on. Why would we be looking around and thinking, what stuff have I liked in the past? There's plenty of stuff I've liked to do in the past, but if I need to accomplish something, then I don't want boundaries. I do want boundaries, but I want them to be as wide as possible. I want to just be absolutely ruthless. There's a way that I don't even know. And I want to somehow explain this where you really get it. But Mike would tell you in words, but I'm so ruthless, it's counterintuitive. You hear it in my language when I talk about government, but it's wherever. When there's something that I want to accomplish, I just don't have boundaries that don't have to be there generally. I just go after it. It's what I'm after. When I wanted to get focused and then get married to the right person, I focused on it and accomplished it and didn't have boundaries in a way that most everyone else doesn't. And that's all that happened to live in Russia. I went there, I spent about 5 months and I didn't have much money, but I had some. And I went out there and I spent 5 months out there. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know anyone there except for my fiance. And I mean, it was 3 different trips. The third one was just more because we wanted to, whatever. And I didn't, first I talked to a bunch of different people, but when I talked to someone, I focused on it. But if all I did was work on that. Now, you could say we don't all have the luxury of that, but I didn't necessarily either. People could say, I don't have the luxury of focusing on OMG the way I do. What else? With my son, right? There's certain things where it's critical that I don't want him to be a government cultist. And that means that I really don't want that. And so I do whatever the hell it takes, short of violating his property rights. I don't mean I hit him, right? But I do whatever it takes within the outermost boundaries and make sure that would be possible. That's why my wife talks to people that say, we're thinking of homeschooling our kid, right? And then they typically end up not when they're wondering. For me, it was absolutely ruthless. Right? If something matters and I want to accomplish it, I don't put barriers in my way. I don't artificially put things that are going to mess with it if at all possible. So it was absolutely off the table, period. Even though it greatly interferes with my ability to hang out with my wife, right? Having him at home. And I really want to be able to have freedom to hang out with my wife in a normal dating type of relationship, but we can't because we have a child. But that is still secondary to I don't want my son to be a government cultist. I don't want him to be an extortionist, to be sick and evil and all that. And so whatever it takes, I'm just trying to give you more examples of ruthlessness. The topic doesn't matter. It's just, I go after stuff with a ruthlessness that's typically unimaginable that people just waffle about. In my friendships or even business partnerships that seem tangential, if they've been an ally to me and they need to be backed up with something and doesn't violate anyone, and someone says, should we do this? Should we back up? I say, yes, to be backing up, period. I'm ruthless with that. In terms of paying people, it's a big issue in my niche and my general industry. People are going back on their word all the time, nonstop, and they have issues paying people on time and so forth. Man, every month I pay people right immediately. I calculate it as fast as possible, get that money out time after time, 100% back. People are absolutely ruthless with just over and over again. It's not about me. I'm talking about being ruthless. Of course, my examples are quite funny, but it's nothing to do with me or how cool I am or not. But there's a way that you want to realize that it's just true that you need to find boundaries that reveal themselves that are as expansive as possible. But that's why I look for them. That's why property rights matter so much. They matter when you have, for people that don't think this stuff matters about property rights and morality, it matters because I'm so freaking ruthless that I better figure out morality because I'll do anything and everything as long, you know what I'm saying? I have no limits, no boundaries. I just go after it. But you can't even typically imagine over and over again in my life. So I've had to figure out where's the outer boundary with morality or whatever, right? Again, when I was going after OMG and making it work, and it's hard to imagine, like I spent so little time and focus with my family and it overlapped because my wife like hardly left the house for a year. He was his original, like his default kind of genetic person. It's not his choice. I don't blame it, but he was just very something where he would just go nuts if we tried to leave the house or whatever, put him down. He's just very intense, but she mainly took care of that upstairs. And if she needed something, that's one thing. And I would get groceries and stuff, but mostly I just focus on OMG. And if Mike called or someone called, I answered it, whatever the time of day, whatever was going on. And so there's a ruthlessness that I think is generally unthinkable to people, right? But I don't violate anyone or anything. You guys know that I look at OMG, right? It tends to keep its word better than people typically in our niche by far. And fulfilling what we say, I don't cut corners there, right? That's it. But whatever it is ruthless. I talk here and there about here's a reason, there's a reason why people are very successful overall in OMG, relatively speaking. But there's just like fundamentally, there's a certain ruthlessness. When people try to copy it, what they don't do is copy the ruthless, but they can't wrap their head around it in a certain way. It just manifests itself in so many seemingly small, invisible ways. But you just never know when it's going to be the thing. And there's something about the ruthlessness, right? But sometimes the path is just in it, like outside of normal boundaries. And it's the only way that you're going to get to certain excessive results, right? And I've watched people try to pussyfoot around dating where they just want to shortcut it, right? And then they don't get there until they're ready to not, and it's the same thing in area after area of life, right? It is exceedingly likely that when my son is like a teenager, he's going to be pretty awesome. But because I go after it with a ruthless sort of way, right? And when he's older, like in his 20s, but because that kind of thing matters, at least to me. Like I chose to reveal itself as a goal to me that obviously has a lot of impact on my life and my wife's life, who I care about a lot, and I care about my son, right? And so there's not even a question with certain things. It just isn't going to happen. Like I know how hard it is to not send your kid to school or whatever. I'm not preaching about that. It's just about ruthless, right? But I didn't know how I would do it. I just knew that it was absolutely off the table and then it was easy. And my wife picks that up from me where to her, it's easy for her to not think about sending him to school. It's off the table for her too. But I think a lot of why it's so easy is I'm absolutely 100%. There's no question. And so that flows, right? The same way with OMG. There's no question in a certain way that it was going to work. And it wasn't determination. It's ruthless a different than determination. Determination is trying to turn gray into black and white. What I do is what's black and white is the goal that reveals itself. And if there's gray, it's in my favor. If that makes any sense. Right? Anything where there's doubt, I'm going after what I want. Right? There better be an ironclad damn reason. If it's going to restrict my ability to go after the thing that I'm working on at the time, then it better be damn clear why it's getting in my way. Otherwise, I go after it. And with nothing, like absolute, whatever the hell it takes. I'll think the unthinkable as long as, again, I have my overall boundaries. That's why they matter so much to me. And if they don't matter to someone else, it has to be because they don't have the same idea of ruthlessness. There's no other way. Because you come to that question, what's the morality line? If you don't come to that question, you're obviously not ruthless. You have all these little rules in your head about whatever. Another example, I said to my wife, when we got married, this won't sound ruthless, but there's a way, not to her, towards her. You'll see what I mean. I was like, look, it's just the two of us. There's no one else involved in our relationship. Like we just choose to be happy or we don't collectively. But normally people have all these other people are trying to please and all these ideas are trying to conform to. But in a relationship, it's just the two of you trying to be happy within the relationship, period. Nothing else going on. That's it. And she's very good at being ruthless with this too. Like sometimes we get in a thing where we feel upset or with each other or whatever, but we so quickly get out of it because we don't want to dwell on it and we just move on typically. We'll resolve real problems, but stuff like that, most of the problem is just dwelling on it. So we just move along. It happens very rarely, relatively speaking. But when it comes up, we both want to be happy. We're not trying to please other people or sound like good on Facebook or whatnot. It's just one thing and as few things messing with it as possible. Well, people get stuck on one person when they're dating. Why? You might say, David, didn't you just say focus on one person? Yeah, you focus not on one person, you focus on what you want. That means there's boundaries where you focus on one person, but it's like getting stuck on one client, right? You figure out what you want. And of course, within boundaries, you do whatever it takes to make it work with one client. But outside of those boundaries, if it's not working, you don't get stuck when it's not working, right? Overall, there's one thing I was trying to get with a long-term relationship. I was wanting to be married to someone that was going to be a great partner for me, right? It's like with money, I was acting like it mattered. So I might as well take care of it. You know what I mean? If you can live without that, more power to you, no problem. But if you're acting like it matters, then take care. Because that was my way of looking at it, right? To me, I acted as if women and a relationship mattered. And so I wanted to take care of it positively and productive. So hopefully that rant that was helpful. Glad, John. And I'm glad if you've resolved what you're working on. And if you're still working on it, then best wishes. Good to see you, John. Very good to see you. John said I've missed a lot of these in the past few months. I think you know why. Trying to plug back into the LOI vibe. Good. Excellent to have you. Megan says, I'll probably wrap this up in a few minutes, but looking at the chain of relationships you wrote on the slide from habits to actions, norms, beliefs, standards, goals, and then looking in the other direction from goals to habits is such a clear way to zoom in and ask questions. Yeah, that scheme, regardless of it, regardless of if I was able to develop it perfectly or give a perfect hierarchy, having that general scheme of the relationship between habits and actions and so forth, standards and goals, norms and beliefs, having that at your fingertips, especially with the rest of the framework that I've been giving you, it should be really helpful as kind of keywords and key concepts to look at and go back and forth. And it all obviously relates to frames and boxes, what I talk about. And it also helps to show why frames matter so much. It's very easy to see how habits affect actions, how standards and norms affect our beliefs and goals. It's easy to see that. And then that in turn can make it easy to see why, because words like foundational frames seem like them. Does that really matter for my life? What is he talking about? If I'm an OMG or I'm just joined OMG, if I'm looking around, like this guy's talking about what foundational frames, what the hell does that have to do with this? Why would I listen to that? That's how I see when I try to write descriptions of my webinars. I'm like, how am I supposed to make this sound like it, not some kind of thing that doesn't make any sense? But anyway, once you see it that way, with how obviously like standards affect goals, then it helps see what I mean by when I say how important and practically useful standards and outer frames, understanding deeper perspectives and foundational frames, foundational perspectives, how practically important. It's so quick and easy to drop goals once you realize you just are looking for the standard that's productive and that naturally leads to focusing on what you want to focus on and dropping the other stuff. And again, you can drop things within boundaries, right? Boundaries are a crucial part of being ruthless, of accomplishing things in general. Being ruthless within boundaries is fundamental to accomplishment. Obviously, you can get lucky, right? If you're not ruthless, you're basically arbitrarily cutting off path to your goal, right? And if you arbitrarily, as a matter of habit, arbitrarily cut off paths to your goal, then lots of times you're going to be cutting off the route path the only path that would be, right? There might not be a path where your child goes to school and doesn't turn into a psychopath. I don't mean a psychopath by the normal world definition, a psychopath by my definition of where someone goes to jail because they broke the law and you're like, God, they broke the law, they should go to jail. That's in my definition. That's an example of a psychopath to me. Chance is different. Here's my thought. I know how we can defeat the police. First, you have to get rid of their helicopter. Then you get rid of, their car. This is nice. So I'm proud of him. Julie said, David, you've already said with regard to eliminating taxation. And when he said that, I tell him, Yeah, we'll get to that later. But I'm still, anyway, Julie says, David, you've often said with regard to eliminating taxation that the alternative will reveal itself once we eradicate tax. Given that you have given this a lot of thought, what potential alternatives you come up with? I don't know. Weirdly enough, other people have, like the guy who wrote libertarianism. There's a number of libertarians. They don't get a lot of press, but there's ways that a government could raise money. I don't believe in government. Unfortunately, inherently means like logically, people mean it to mean a moral magic wand, that just makes things moral. So there's a way that I don't believe in that concept because it's inherently nonsensical. So I don't believe in government as people conceive it. I don't believe there's such a thing as just making a magic wand that makes immoral things more. Rules can simply reveal themselves and get into people's heads and that are correct, and people can just abide by them. Practically speaking, there's plenty of examples of talk about the rampaging hordes of Canadians and Mexicans to make a point is people talk about, oh, we need a stand, like our founding fathers, to them, a standing army was an anathema. It was an absurdity. It was the Third Amendment is very instructive. It's a fascinating event. And it shows the mindset of the original framers of the Constitution. Is the Constitution perfect? No. But of course, it was a historical miracle, relatively speaking. And it would be nice if we were at least adhered to that, which limits, the Constitution does one thing, and that is limit the power of the federal government. That's why liberals hate it, right? They call it negative liberties or something when they talk about the Bill of Rights. They identify with government and look at government as the savior, right? And as the source of good. And so things that limit federal government to them or any government to them are bad, right? They feel like government is good. The fewer limit, the better, except for they're all full of contradictions, right? As are conservatives, but of course, the minute Trump's elected, then of course they hate all kinds of aspects of government while simultaneously wanting more government and wanting more taxes. Anyhow, the original framers, for example, couldn't imagine a standing army. And they thought if there was one, that was a terrible idea. And so they made it. And when they imagined a standing army, they did not imagine heroes. They imagined villains. To them, a standing army is equivalent to villains, not heroes. And the Third Amendment proves that what they thought, I want you to imagine something. Imagine you have a 16-year-old daughter, right? And she takes showers, does this and that. The Third Amendment says that a standing army, soldiers can't force their way into your house and sleep. But it says that, as opposed to implying it, it said that's what they thought the military would actually do. That was their view of the military and standing army. And it's my view today. But that was their view. My view is their view. You said, roughly speaking. They thought of them as the moralities people. They would kick open your door and sleep in your daughter's bed. Or sleep somewhere, but they would force their way into your house and live there. Because the Third Amendment says you don't have to quarter soldiers in your house from like a standing army, essentially. They say like in time of peace or whatever. But they actually put that in there because they obviously thought it would happen. What does it mean to have to quarter soldiers? It means they physically force their way into your house and sleep there. And the Third Amendment specifically says they can't do that because they thought they would. That's fascinating. Almost as fascinating as the Second Amendment, which is to ensure, of course, it's been violated to hell, but it means that the whole point of it is for an individual to be able to kill as many government enforcers as possible. That's literally the meaning of the point of the Second Amendment. It is to kill government figures. Nowadays, they'd actually call that terrorism if you do exactly what the Second Amendment protects, is to encourage you to be able to kill as many government people as possible. The one and only reason for it. They wanted the citizens to be equal in arms as any armed forces of the federal government. And state government is the same, like logical. So they wanted, in today's standards, individuals should be able to have aircraft carriers, fighter jets, bazookas, not this assault rifles, right? You should have a whole air force of your own if you want, in order to kill specifically government agents or anyone that would stand on the side of the government in a revolution. And Thomas Jefferson was very explicit about it, right? And Madison. And fascinating, right? That was a norm. This is a fascinating for norms and standards, right? Literally the people who founded the government of the United States in the first place, that was what they thought. That was their mindset. Now, when I say it, I sound like some kind of crazy, right? Maybe not to some of you, but normally like a crazy psychopath just saying what I said. But that's literally clearly what what was there, right? And every single member of the armed forces has sworn an oath to defend us against anyone who would, against any domestic enemies of the Constitution, which is any violations that exceed the limits on the federal government. Anyone that goes outside of the limits set by the Constitution should basically be killed by any and all past and present members of the armed forces of America. But of course, none of them are doing that. They're not killing any of the people that are operating outside, right? Of the any and all restrictions on arms is prohibited, right? Now, and the express purpose is to match any army which they hope would exist, but any kind of government enforcers. You want individual citizens to literally be as strong as them, specifically so they can kill them if necessary. And the oath that military members take to defend us against domestic enemies of the Constitution, the only domestic enemy of the Constitution could be pseudo-federal government people operating outside of those limits. And what does defend mean? Hold bake sales, hold protests? You assume that they mean kill, right? If you're talking about the armed forces, taking interesting logic, right? In terms of funding, you get me started on that. In terms of funding, there's a number of examples, national parks, stuff. There was none of this taxation early on funding, so to speak. What do you have to fund anyway? You don't need a standing army. Police, what do? They show up after the fact, right? I'm more scared of them as a quote unquote law-abiding person, which you can't be a law-abiding person. The laws are unknowable and undefinable. Lawyers don't know them. Police don't know. Why do the elected officials get salaries? The salary is literally pocketing money, right? It's literally embezzlement, right? They're just stuffing their pockets with money. Like they call it a salary, but what is their salary for? Extorting us, doing evil, irrelevant things, right? So why are any of the people getting paid that are making laws? They're not being paid. They're literally stuffing their own pockets with the money they keep, right? It's embezzlement and organized crime. It's not a salary. You can call anything a salary, right? Any organized crime boss can call it a salary when they take your money. A robber can break into your house and say, I'm collecting my salary. I'm paying myself a salary for stealing from you. My job is to steal from you, and here's my salary, and they take it from you. And that's their salary. So you really get down to very few stuff. You get down to maybe roads, but then there's a hilarious meme where there's roads in the forest, and it says proof that deer have a government, because apparently you can't have roads without government. And plenty of people would donate to genuinely useful things that they wanted to see. There's be donations. There's all kinds of other stuff. And in terms of very practical terms, we had the same basic government without taxation. If we went back, first of all, the government existed that way for 150 years, right? Before they got that vote through for income tax, based on imagining that the people would be taxed were an outgroup. It's such a powerful thing. The government, these people who want power, they accumulate power by imagining that the power will be used to take from an outgroup and give to an in-group. And so then people, oh yeah, I love that. I love it. I want to see more tyranny because tyranny is awesome. It'll restrict, otherwise hamper outgroup and give more of a relative advantage to whatever in-group. And so people want tyranny, oppression, violence, imprisonment, slavery, extortion, just because they're the default. But this is such a great illustration of the power of default and how reason doesn't matter to people. In practice, of course, it can, and it might in certain circumstances, but for the most part, they would so much rather have their in-group have a relative advantage of an out-group. They would rather that than not have imprisonment, murder, extortion, slavery. They'd rather have all those evils if it gives their in-group a relative advantage. They prefer that. That's how powerful that feeling is. Exactly. Before 1913, there was no income tax in the United States. There were some excise taxes, but no income tax. Exactly. And they got it through by saying, oh, we're going to tax the rich at 1%. Passive income. It wasn't supposed to be on earned income. As a matter of fact, that amendment it expressly excludes earned income in what the language meant at the time. So what do the tyrants do? They make people just believe something different about what the language meant. Anyway, whatever. But yeah, there's a number of potential ways to fund the government. And in fact, it was funded for 150 years, for more of history than not, without starting with at least not having income. John says, hi, David. I have a question about playing to win overall in life. Sorry, I was going to end this soon. I have two areas I'm looking to break through with. The number one priority is money getting. Number two, I'm eyeballing is dating in a romantic relationship. Yeah, I did one at a time myself. I realized that might feel like you can't only do one or the other at a time. And I'm not necessarily saying how to do it this way or that, but you can make them into one in some way if that works, if they're going to pull in the same direction. You want to pay strong attention to having a woman that's going to support you in making, when I say support you, I'm not being support not in terms of being lesser, but just in terms of the same way she would want someone that supports her goals, right? You want someone that's genuinely going to support your goals, which means no eye rolling when you need to work, no having to justify the burden of proof. Is such a powerful thing, right? Let's say my son comes down, which he does, into my basement office, and basically I have to be doing something like work, or else he assumes I'm going to play with him what he wants, right? The minute the burden of proof is, or if someone's going to say to you, oh, when are you going to finish work so we can go out? That person's going to drastically undermine and make it very difficult for you to make much money if they're always tapping their foot and acting like you're basically wrong for working and trying to earn money. Very common thing. So watch out for something like that. And then it's a long question for now. I welcome long, detailed questions. They really help me expand on things, but I need to end the webinar. I know I've said this before, but I'll look to revisit this next week. I'll also read it after the webinar. A mathematical model, I was talking about that. What you're saying about dollars and parties is really helping suss out my offer that we have to figure out, is Robert Esposito. We have to figure out what other priorities that others are willing to pay for. Absolutely. It's related to what Fletch's last webinar spoke about. Good on Fletch. I'm starting to see that many businesses don't actually prioritize SEO. Exactly. You want to, some don't, but you want to find a way to frame things that gets in with their priorities, such as getting a sense of their with the advertising budget and going from advertising budget and prioritizing there instead of SEO. With client consulting, my bottleneck might be figuring out what the priorities for a business. Another reason to potentially make your own e-commerce business or any kind of, even a real life business isn't crazy. Again, you don't like, it's part of being ruthless. It's not that you need to make your own real life business, like brick and mortar, even business or service business. That's not necessarily brick and mortar, but do something where but maybe you spend a few years. And I know some of the OMGers succeed without doing this, that it might sound ridiculous, but there's a way. I'm just trying to give you a sense of how I would approach things. I wouldn't necessarily do that or not, but where it takes, if you need to get in the head of the business, then having a business of your own that's local will help you understand it better. And plus you can be your own best client and you can crush it, like Aiden and his roofing business. Now, of course, he had a background that would help him with that. For a lot of people, they won't do anything, become a millionaire that'll take more than 3 or 4 years by accident. They won't put it that way. But what if you have to work on learning how to be a roofer for 3 or 4 years? It's not that I'm suggesting that. I'm just pointing out that if that's off the table in someone's mind, there's a way that they're not being ruthless in a certain way. It's not that I did anything and everything. Like they were not efficient routes, but it needs to be off the table because there's genuinely a more efficient route. Just getting another business set up online or even in real life can be instructive about a lot of things and gives you a different basis for talking to potential client. And if you talk to them as an owner of an existing brick and mortar business, you expect to get referrals from existing brick and mortar businesses. If you do SEO for your own business, you get a lot of clients right away. Do as, oh geez, I'm breaking out. Shit. Lenny? I might even have the name totally wrong. And I apologize for it if you ever listened to this webinar. But early on, and he's still with us, but we have an OMGer who had a basketball clinic, like a basketball camp or coaching week that he did. And he did SEO for that and crushed it, crushed his competitor used to be bigger than him. And he started ranking for stuff that was relevant for that. And it just was awesome for him. And then he got all kinds of, what's his name? Mike probably posted it here. Lonnie Welsh, exactly. And then naturally he got all these clients because he crushed it with SEO for himself. And then it's pretty easy to get clients at that point because you had this level of belief and understanding. You can talk to people. 6 figures a year doing basketball coaching too. Yeah, exactly. That's an example. Yeah. I think I've made friends with Ryan today with what I talked about with government. Great. And Mike posted a third amendment, right? I find that third amendment fascinating. It's a fascinating exercise in logic to say, wow, if necessarily meant this is what the founding framers were thinking, put an amendment like that. It's pretty shocking. I thought they would actually. Yeah. Jennifer's chiming in with another thing about a crazy law with the students and fining them or jailing them for being late. Yeah. Okay. Great, guys. For now, I'll end the webinar here and we will continue next week with mostly talking about stuff about the mind. And then once in a while, someone will say something about government. Go on a bit of a rant. But remember what I did about ruthlessness? That was a great rant there. Remember the takeaway with the main way to control the mind is its goals. You'll naturally drop goals. Remember the helicopter illustration with the forest? You don't have to try to drop goals. Typically, what you do is you find the perspective that naturally makes the other goals look ridiculous or inappropriate for this particular situation, right? And then that lets you drop them. And there's that kind of progression I gave you. Right before you control your mind. Your goals got changed right before your goals got changed. You found the right standard and perspective type standard to look from. And if no such perspective exists in your mind right now, you could find them by working at it, by thinking things through. I've done that a lot with you and so forth. You hug at a thread. And I've demonstrated that over and over again doing that. Even the Third Amendment thing was a good example of tugging at a thread to see what the framers had to them thinking. Because you look at this logical progression. In order for them to make an amendment, they thought that it was very plausible that soldiers would do that. If you think that soldiers will kick your door down and sleep in your house against your will, then what do you think of a standing army? What do you think of those people, right? So that's like a logical threat. I'm not saying that's how soldiers are at all, but it's interesting to note that was what the framers thought and what they thought of the standing army, et cetera. What they thought of the character of people that would join government and do that sort of thing and be part of the standing army. Okay, so we have this takeaway here on the slide. We have the helicopter illustration, and we have the holding a piece of iron with a different magnet illustration, and we have my rant about ruthlessness. And we have this slide about habits and actions, norms, beliefs, and standards and goals. Awesome, guys. Thanks. Amazing participation. As always, incredible discussion and love it. You'd think we had hundreds and hundreds of people on the way we have this discussion. We have plenty of people on, but still, you guys outperform your numbers. Have an awesome week, and I will see you likely next. I'll post the webinar. There you go. Okay, take care, guys. And you're very welcome to everyone that said thank you. Always appreciate your posts. And make sure to go over to NHP team and participate in the post about OMG Live if you would, one way or the other. Can't quite tell. It's a blur picture. Excellent, I believe. Take care all. Thanks, Mike, for the gift. You're very welcome, Jennifer.